All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Kaleb Lewis. I am the Director of Career Services for Costello College of Business. I am joined with a wonderful employer partner tonight, Bill Williams. So, Bill, if you would like to do a brief introduction.
I spent over 30 years in big law firms, conducted scores of interviews over the years, anywhere from law students who were looking for a summer associate job to lateral partners. So I have significant experience in that sphere, but beyond that, I don't. I mean, I've seen a lot, but it's not a particularly broad experience when it comes to the employment world. But I think most of the things that I observed and opinions that I have about it probably extend to other areas as well. Looking forward to the presentation here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bill. And yes, law interviews, a lot of the information that Bill has experience with, the things that he's going to recommend, examples to share, definitely do translate particularly well with behavioral interviews. Where you might see some kind of differences is really looking in the different types of interviews. So technical or case study interviews, those may look a little different than a traditional law school. However, a lot of the information will definitely transfer. So we have a packed agenda tonight. I am not going to go word by word over the slides for you. So they will be here. We will hit the highlights of the slides. And as you see something, if you do have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We are recording tonight's session, so just be aware if you do ask a question and unmute, you may end up on our recording. So what we're going to cover, we are going to briefly touch on the different types of interviews and really spend our focus on looking at how to prepare, how to answer questions, what you should be bringing to an interview, what you wear, and how to follow up. So we're really going to be focused on the actual act of interviewing, but giving you lots of tips, suggestions, questions that you can ask, and some great advice to all of us. So the various different types of interviews that we see in the business world are kind of as follows. You have pre-recorded interviews. Pre-recorded interviews typically take place with just a computer screen. So it is a set of questions that you can do at any given time, and you are recorded in that. The interviewer is actually a computer. You typically get a 30 to 60 second kind of brainstorming period before your camera pops on. You are recorded for anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes. At that end of that time, your camera turns off, your response has been saved, and then the computer asks a secondary question. So it's not interviewing directly with a person. This is really common in a lot of big firms, such as Deloitte, PwC, some education institutions, Northern Virginia Community College, as well as big companies like Hilton, when they have maybe multiple interviews that are taking place. They have students record their responses, and then staff members watch those recorded responses at a later date. You will also see a virtual. Virtual would be through Zoom or Teams. That can be with a one-on-one, can be one-on-panel, or one-on-group. Meaning that there might be multiple people in the room that is actually interviewing you. In-person interviews, we are seeing an increase in in-person interviews coming back after post-COVID. So it is more and more common to actually go to the site location that you would be working at and conducting your interview in person. We also have panel, where it is one candidate with multiple individuals on a panel. This can typically be anywhere from 2 and as up to, frankly, I've seen it up to about 6 staff members interviewing one candidate. Group interviews. Group interviews are interviews in which there are multiple candidates present. These typically will take place earlier in the search process. So these are not necessarily going to be final round interviews, but you may experience them particularly common in some consulting companies. We'll do a group interview. This can also be seen and if the firm is taking you out to lunch or doing a networking event as part of the interview process, they will typically have multiple candidates that are there at the same time. And last is our problem solving or case study competition type of interviews. These can be done asynchronously and recorded, but many times you will be working directly with an interviewer who will pose questions to you, and you must answer those and solve the problem that they're given. So as you're preparing, really the things that you want to make sure that you do is interview 101. Know a number of facts about the company, about the position that you are looking at and looking for, as well as some interesting facts about the company. So Bill, can you talk a little bit about your experience and from the interview perspective, some of the things that we were talking about before today as it related to like the first question you asked?
Yeah, well, usually the first question I would ask, and probably the most important question, the candidates had been pre-screened for skills and suitability along those lines. So there wasn't any need for me to delve into, what do you know? Can you solve this problem? But the most important question for me was why Sidley in the case of my last law firm? Why do you want to come here? And I was always surprised at some very bright, talented law students who would give an answer about Sidley that described every firm they were talking to. I like that you're large, that you're international, that you have this practice and that practice. And I said, look, every firm you're talking to has that. Why Sidley? That would usually sort of set the tone. I don't know that I checked out immediately, but it was a devastating start for that candidate. The best answers that I had were things like, well, I think the very best answer is I talked to two people who were here last summer, and they gave me a detailed report on what it was like, and it's the place where I really want to go. That was probably the best. There's so much information available online. You can cram more in it that you could possibly need. But just to be able to tie what they do to your experience or your interests, I think is very important.
Perfect. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. So making sure in your preparation that you are looking at the company's mission statement, their value statements, that you have some interesting facts about them. If they have been in the news mentioning something like that. And as Bill said, anytime when you have the ability to network and talk to individuals who are there, being able to articulate that shows that not only are you just doing an interview, but you have a vested interest in the company itself. And you've already gone above and beyond in your preparation by asking other individuals who were in similar situations to you a few years ago, directly what their experience was like, and being able to even name drop the individuals is wonderful. So obviously you can look at the company website and their mission statement, but also be aware that you can look at companies and sites like LinkedIn, Glassdoor, Handshake, salary.com, anything that will give you the ability to understand the company, their competitors, their industry at that deeper level. And on sites like Glassdoor and Handshake, there are also interview testimonials where you can actually see other individuals' experiences with that specific company for that specific role in which you are interviewing. So making sure that you visit those, you are doing your research, doing your homework, and are better preparing yourself for those interview questions. So again, here is just kind of some of that pieces, looking at the job description, understanding what you are going to be doing, the knowledge skills that you need, the qualities that are required for the position, anything in terms of trends within the industry, showcasing your knowledge of that specific industry line that you are applying to, even thinking along the lines of how is the industry going to be changing in the next couple of years, and what can you do as an intern or a new staff member to help them achieve those goals. Another thing that you will want to make sure that you do have a question or a response prepared for is a realistic salary. So knowing the kind of standard salary range for positions might come up in an interview. Typically, I don't like students to mention salary on their end. However, the company may ask, the individuals you're interviewing with may ask that question during an interview, and you do want to go ahead and be prepared. Again, types of clients, product, services, relationships to competitors, etc. So again, just overall, understand the company, understand the industry. Common questions that you are going to have. So these are also things, typically most interviews are going to be behavioral in nature. A behavioral interview really is kind of the theory behind behavioral interviewing is your past behavior will predict your future actions. So a behavioral interview wants to see candidates talk about their experiences using examples. And we'll cover the STAR approach or the STAR method a little bit later in more detail, but this is going to be one where you will see, tell me about a time when you encountered a difficult situation, how did you navigate it and overcome that obstacle? So anytime when you're asked about a past action or for an example, that is going to be your key indicator that this is a behavioral interview question. And you can Google search, top 20 behavioral interview questions. However, the kind of standards are tell me about yourself and why you want to work here. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? Tell me about a time when you either succeeded or failed on a specific task. Depending on the position, if it requires teamwork, you will likely have a question about your experience working in a team. What is your 5 to 10 year career plan and how can this company help get you there? Are all examples of common questions to be prepared for. And with your experiences, remember that we need to focus on the kind of beyond just your work experience. Use your class projects, your work in classes, volunteering, student organizations, paid, unpaid positions, your athletic activities. All of these things can be pulled from your work in the community, if you do community involvement. Any of these things are perfect examples to be able to utilize. And know that the best preparation that you can do is actually conducting mock interviews with career services staff members. So we do one-on-one mock interviews. All you need to do is sign up for a slot. So make sure that you're reaching out to career services for that. In terms of day of, if you are doing an in-person interview, make sure that you do have copies of your resume. Typically, the firm will have already printed those out, but it's always a good bet to bring a couple of copies, at least one for yourself, so that if a interviewer asks you about something specific on your resume, you have a copy available to you. You will typically also have some sort of notes, ideally in a Padfolio, notepad, pen, plan your outfit in advance, and we'll show a few examples of what to wear later on tonight. And then make sure that you know how to get to the location that you are going. And always remember, it's better to be early than even on time. And if you are late, it's almost like you didn't show up. So definitely make sure that you do get there in advance. Bill, anything else you would add in terms of before they start with their interview?
No, I think that covers it.
Wonderful. The other thing that you will want to do in preparation is get ready to have questions for the employer. So typically the last 5, sometimes 15 minutes during an interview is reserved for you to ask questions of the employer. This is your opportunity to gauge, do you fit in with their company culture? If you are interviewing with the person who will be your supervisor, to see, do you get along with them in this kind of small little test field? So here are just a few examples of questions that you should start thinking about. And typically you want anywhere from 3 to 4 questions to be able to ask an employer. And those can be questions like, what sorts of projects would I be working on in the first 3 months, and how would we measure success? That could be questions on, tell me what your favorite thing about working here is, again, gauging the company culture. It could be looking at, what does a typical career path and professional development look like? Again, showcasing that you intend to show and stay there for a wide variety. So again, anything like this, and again, this link here, best questions to ask an interviewer. When you get the slides later tomorrow, you'll be able to click those links. Bill, from your experience, what, if anything, has stood out when it comes to questions that candidates have asked you during an interview?
It's very common to get a question in the law firm setting about, it's the fourth bullet point. What makes someone successful here? I don't know that I was ready for that answer, to be honest. I mean, I look around at people that I know did well and people that didn't. I really couldn't identify anything clear on that. So that was always a tough question. I didn't ask the tough questions that were on your earlier slide about successes and failures, things like that. I tried to keep away from that. Probably the toughest question I would ask is, I would look at a candidate and say, look, based on your resume and your presence, you're going to get an offer from everywhere you go. People are going to want you. What is it about the firm that will cause you to choose that firm? And that was usually, if things were going well, it was usually a pretty good answer. It's the same as the why Sidley question. I had some pretty bad answers there too, as well. I was talking to a candidate that had some military experience, high up in the class at Yale, and the Yaleys always had a different view of the world than students from other schools. And I asked him, I said, so suppose you come in as a junior associate and you're assigned to a case where the senior associate overseeing you is 4 years younger than you. How would you propose to navigate? Do you view that as a challenge, and how would you navigate it? The individual's answer was, well, I'd leave that up to HR. It's like, not a good idea. You need to be ready for some tough questions. And, some people are fond of doing that. I never was. I wanted to get to know the person and see about the people fit. Very important at City, very collegial place. So.
Great. Thank you. So during your interview, as you start, and this really applies to multiple styles of interview. So arriving to the office or location early, typically anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes early. There is a little bit on being too early. So if you have planned your route, traffic was lighter than expected and you're 30 minutes early, I would not go into the office location. I would probably wait in my car for a little bit, prepare yourself before walking in, and then walk in that 10 to 15 minutes early slot. For online or virtual interviews, make sure that you have tested your technology, making sure that your lighting, your internet connection, all of those things are stable, and then being able to join the Zoom call or the Teams meeting anywhere from about 5 to 10 minutes early, but knowing that you likely won't be let in until it is your time. But again, it does show that you are there, that you are early, that you are prepared. During in-person interviews, make sure that you greet everyone with a nice firm handshake, a smile, making good eye contact, and feel free to kind of small talk before the interview officially begins. I think one thing that Bill said in his response was he, as an interviewer, was really trying to get to know students or the people that we're interviewing. And this, through that small talk, talking about, their day, talking about the office location, being able to do that can have that favorable impression and allows interviewers to get to know you a little bit better than if you just walked in, just answered their questions during an interview. So again, be you during the interview, and remember that if you're nervous, that's okay. But try to do your best to control any nervous habits like tapping your foot, clicking pens, anything like that. And sometimes I actually like to have students say if they're nervous. How are you today? Oh, I'm really good. I'm just really nervous. I'm really excited. I've prepared for this interview, and I really really hope I get the position. But I've put a little bit of pressure on myself, so I'm a little nervous right now. An interviewer, if I heard that response, it would be my job to say, "Oh, don't be so nervous. You'll do fine." But you're showcasing your excitement. You're showcasing that you really haven't invested um, some time and effort into preparing, and that you're really wanting it. So that can also create a nice little safety net if maybe you don't answer a question to the best of your abilities. Your interview knows that you might be nervous and might be a little bit more gracious in their notes. The other thing is make sure that your volume is good. So making sure that everyone can hear you. However, you're not shouting at them. So kind of taking scope of how big the room is. Is there noises that you need to talk over? And if you're a fast talker, which can be a little hard, make sure that you try to slow down. The worst thing that you can do as an interviewer is take a 30-minute interview and you get done within 10 minutes. That to me tells me that you didn't answer the questions to the depth that we need to. You're not asking the correct questions. And then essentially from an employer's perspective, you ended up wasting some time. So make sure that you try to fill in the time that is allocated to you as best as you can. Be an active listener, jot down notes. This is particularly true if you feel that you need to write down the questions that they asked you. But when you are jotting down your notes, freehand notes. So you don't need to write word for word, but if you do need to write down the keywords to remember all parts of their questions, definitely make sure that you do those types of things. When you are giving your answers, if you have down your own notes and you need to flip a page or two to look at your notes that you've done and used to prepare, you are also able to do that. Just try to make sure that that is at a minimum. We're not going to flip through all of our notes. You're not reading off of scripts or anything like that when you're giving your examples. Be positive and also make sure that you are enthusiastic. We want to make sure that you are using positive examples, good language, being detailed. And again, we'll cover the STAR method in just a minute. But then you're also able to ask and engage as best as you can. A great way to end an interview. So the last question to ask them as you get ready to leave for their is ask about expected hiring timelines. And then if possible, definitely try to get the interviewer's contact information and make sure that you send a follow-up or a thank you note, typically within about 24 hours of your interview. Bill, was it common for you to get thank you notes? And if so, what was your perception of those?
Most of the thank you notes I got were very well done and were more or less confirming of a conclusion I had reached about the candidate. I don't recall any follow-ups. Just go back to that point about being nervous. Law firms being very buttoned down and risk averse. We're all told not to send any signals about a potentially positive result. I broke that violently twice by making an offer on the spot to a person. They were such a strong candidate, and I talked to a couple of previous interviewers. But what I would normally do is pivot to something a little easier for the nerves. And one of my favorite places to go would be to tell me about your interests. If it's baseball, if it's music, if it's movies, doesn't matter. Tell me about, where did it start, and then to get them to talk in a way that's animated about that, and not to be concerned if a substantial part of the interview is consumed by that discussion. As I said, in my role, qualifications were already checked off, more or less, Uh, but I say that because of the number of times in the evaluation process where there would be differing views on a candidate. Sometimes because they wanted to push their own candidate and so forth. But when there were differing views, often that discussion would end with someone saying, "Yeah, but I like Kaleb," and that would be the end of it. Because Sidley was a very collegial place, and finding someone that will be a collegial member of the team was always very important for us, especially when it came to lateral partners. That was a critical evaluation there. So,
And I think it's important to note for students is that typically when you get to final round interviews, so we're talking, you might have done a phone screen, you might have had a panel, and now you're meeting one-on-one with a supervisor. So as you go through the kind of various different phrases, exactly as Bill said, that at some point it becomes, we know you can do the job. We wouldn't have wasted all of our time if we didn't feel that way. And it's really about cultural fit. Can I see you sitting here working with me on projects, or supervising you, or sitting at the across from you, going out to lunch? Can I see you meeting with our clients? So as you go through the interview process, typically when you get to that final round, they know that you can do the job. And so it is all about your personality. It's about your interest. It's about making sure that they are hiring the best person, and the person that's going to represent the company in the best light possible. Pre-recorded, so we kind of mentioned these before, but here are just a few tips for pre-recorded. So making sure that biggest one is looking at your lighting, making sure that you've got good lighting, that your face is nice and bright on the camera, and that you have things in the background that are not going to be distractions for you. So making sure that you also close and mute all other system notifications like Teams, like your email, things like that, things that could maybe distract you. And then also letting people know that you're going to be doing this interview and that they need to stay out of the room or kind of leave you alone for that period of time. And for our students, remember that you can book locations across campus, like things like in the library, where you have a more private space to conduct those. So definitely reach out to Career Services. We also might be able to provide some suggestions on where you could go. And then if you don't have a background or something, you can definitely download GMU approved Zoom backgrounds and use those as you need to. Centering yourself, again, we've talked a little bit about lighting, and then making sure that you're not just doing your meeting on your phone, and that your camera is positioned correctly so interviewers are not having a weird angle. I have seen some where students have been on their phone and their phone is so far down that we were actually seeing up the student's nose during the interview process. And from an interviewer's perspective, it was very, very awkward and kind of distracting. So making sure that you've got it propped up, a tripod if you need to, books, things like that, so that it is almost like you're looking at them at eye level. And then doing your best to also keeping track of like where your camera is, looking at the camera lens, not necessarily at your screen. I have had a computer where my Zoom camera was actually at the bottom left. And so if I look directly at the camera, I was looking quite far down. If I was looking at the screen, it looked like I was looking up to the top right and looking up at the sky from where my camera was. So again, just know where your camera is and ideally look at your camera. Really important for interviews, particularly when it comes to virtual, and this is where we are seeing AI come into play, is that more and more recruiters are getting to the point where that we can understand when you are reading off of a script, whether that is we are seeing your eyes move or just based off of how you are talking, we can tell that either AI wrote your script for you or you're using a software to prompt your answers. So in the best case scenario, don't use those. Do the preparation, but ahead of time, don't rely on a computer or AI to write your interview responses. And remember, practice makes perfect. So the more you practice, the more you do mock interviews, the more natural it will come across and the more confident you will, to where you don't need to use those devices. Costello students do have the ability to actually get an online AI interview tool. This does not write your answers for you, but it is a practice partner. And so that is our Costello Career AI with Theo, our career coach. There will be a QR code later on in the presentation. All students need to do, and this is reserved for Costello students, is just fill out the form, and then you will get access 24 to 48 hours afterwards. And here is that QR code. So I'll pause here if any business students want to scan this QR code and request it. And if you didn't get the QR code, you will get these slides later on. So here is just how you can use AI effectively when you're doing your preparation. Again, not while you're in the interview, but doing your preparation. So we have a few prompts here. How can I prepare for common interview questions in this role? And then you would copy and paste the job description there. It will prompt a number of different questions that you might likely come across, pulling from various different sites like Glassdoor, Indeed, Career Builder, etc. And then you can also ask, what STAR statements can I use in an interview to communicate my experience for this position, and there. So again, AI is good for brainstorming, but again, it should not be a reliance factor. So good to get some ideas, but then you should take those ideas, make them your own, make sure that you fully understand what it is, because AI is not yet to the point where AI doesn't understand business process. AI doesn't understand human interaction. And it is very common for students who utilize AI, they are just covering the surface level. They're not going down into the depth. And the person that you're interviewing, they are professionals. They may quickly be able to tell that you have no idea what you are talking about, and you are kind of just relying on that basic surface level as opposed to truly understanding the information. Here are some other additional examples that you can use. Again, we're not going to cover all of these, but you will get access to these later. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about kind of your presentations and packaging. And again, we're going to really focus on the STAR method. So STAR method is for behavioral interviewing. Your STAR method is going to be situation, task, action or activity, and result. And in an interview, we are going to ideally focus on the activity or actions as well as the results. This is the part that most employers are looking for when it comes to how you can respond to the STAR method. So always put the emphasis towards the end. And again, how will you be able to use that is tell me a time when, give me an example of. That is going to be your indicator that you should use an example. And with your example, the STAR method is the best way to do that. So tell me about a time when you led a team project. You can actually break it down into the exact STAR standard. The situation that I found myself in was, during my final year of business school, we were assigned a capstone project to design a marketing entry strategy for a new product. The task that I needed to complete was, and then you can respond there. And then again, the action steps that we took to solve those problems were, and finally, the result or what I learned was. So early on in your interview practice, you may actually be able to use those full STAR method and remind yourself situation, task, action, or activity and result. As you get more and more familiar with them, you can probably drop the stating the situation was, the tasks were, the actions were, and just incorporate all of that into one example. However, if you are nervous, writing down the STAR method at the top of your note page can help remind you to follow that formula. Remember to keep your stories simple and clear. And again, remember that the focus is not necessarily on the given situation. The focus is really on the later part where you are focused on how you solved that situation and what the exact outcome was. And it is okay if your outcome is an outcome that is you failed, but don't just leave it at that. Unfortunately, we didn't complete the project as well as we could have. Tell me what you learned. What did you take away from that? How did you apply that failure into another situation where you were more successful? So in a situation, remember that the result sometimes is what did you learn in the situation? And in here, be ready for follow-up questions. And again, this is really where you want to make sure that you're finding examples that you can speak on and elaborate in, because an interviewer may ask a follow-up question. And then if you did use any tool, any business process, any technology, make sure that you do articulate that in your response. And again, be able to ask or answer follow-up questions from. Bill, any advice or anything that you would like to share on encountering the STAR method?
I think one of the things that you and I talked about, Kaleb, was if there's an item on your resume, something you did any time in your life, could be as far back as high school, could be recent. If you get a question about that, tell me about your job, your summer job this time. You should have an answer that's enthusiastic about it. Don't put something on your resume that you absolutely hated. And the answer doesn't sound practiced. Just talk about, oh, glad you answered that question. I really like that, and so forth. That's important.
And again, very, very common in interviews that they may ask you about a very random, obscure bullet on your resume. So again, be prepared to answer, as Bill said, be prepared to answer about anything that you have on there. Here are, again, a number of different tips. So focus on your contribution as opposed to a group's effort. So making sure that you're highlighting your specific role in things, because remember that you are the one interviewing, not the team that you worked on. So it is okay. And I know many cultures might feel a little uncomfortable to talk or brag about yourself. But in an interview is when you will definitely want to make sure you do so. And remember to quantify. Employers like to hear about the result piece of situations. And so quantification, numbers, hours saved, engagement numbers, percentages, anything that you can have, even if it is anecdotal, are all really good. And again, you should be including these numbers within your resume. And again, your examples should mirror those numbers there. So if I see it on your resume, you should be able to speak about that quantification. Here are some common behavioral and informational sample questions. And do note with these questions that they can be the positive side of things. Tell me about a time when you worked as a part of a team that was successful in reaching your goal. What was your role? How were you effectively able to work together? That's a positive example. However, an interview may ask, tell me about a time when you worked as a member of a team and did not meet your goal. What was your role in here, and how have you taken that example and applied it to the future? Something like that. So being able to have some positive examples, as well as maybe some examples where you learn something if you have a negative experience. But don't focus on the negative side. Again, we're not, as Bill said, I hated that. Oh, that group was horrible. And that's the reason why we were failing. You want to have kind of that self introspection and be able to transfer the skills and the things that might have come about of that failure moving into a new position. There are certain interview questions that employers should not ask. So anything age, race, ethnicity, gender, religion, disability, marital status, pregnancy, all of these types of things, they are questions that should not be asked during an interview process. So just be aware that there are certain protections that are in place. Typically in here, we also recommend for students to not necessarily always give up some free answers. Tell me what you do in your spare time, bringing up things like your partners, things like that. Focus more on yourself, focus more on your hobbies, your activities, the things that keep you there. Bill, as a lawyer, anything you want to talk about on kind of unlawful questions that you've seen, or advice that you would give students about answering questions?
I used to advise students about one point, and many of my partners thought that was an inappropriate thing to say. This was back in the day when there was a real focus on adding diversity to your team. I remember at Sidley and even at Fulbright in the earlier years, clients would demand that a certain amount of diversity be reflected in your team that was assigned to that client. So I would tell students, if there's anything about you that allows you to check the box, yes, for diversity, please make sure it's in there. Well, that was not taken well by some people. Other people thought it was a good idea because, you could have a candidate with a English sounding name or German, whatever it is, whose mother is actually Japanese, whatever. That they are permitted to allow the firm to check the box. We hired 19 summer associates, 10 of them were diverse. I think in the age of where there's a firm target on DEI, maybe that's not important anymore. Maybe it's actually frowned upon or forgiven, but you can't ask questions about that. But it can be revealed for what it might be worth. I guess where I come out now is don't worry about that as much as I did. I mean, I was when I was at Fulbright, I was under direction to hire African American students. Period. End of story. And I once got a call from the Hispanic Law Student Association in Houston, and they asked me, "What are you doing to hire Hispanic students?" And the truthful answer is nothing. I'm not focusing on that. Probably fumbled the answer badly. I was worried about seeing something above the law about it, but I managed to escape that. But anyway, that's too much of a story for this point. We're getting up to question time.
Yeah, really, it's about your comfortability in answering. So again, the questions that touch on these, really, they should not be asking. However, do know that there are some things that are relevant that might be around. So things like, are you legally eligible to work in the US? Do you now or ever need sponsorship? These questions are common, particularly in applications, before you even get to an interview state. However, really with answering questions, remember to always feel comfortable. If for whatever reason you do encounter a situation that does make you uncomfortable, say something to career services. Let us know, and we can kind of take it from there and follow up on your behalf. Again, we've talked about this. Just know how to get to the company, and always make sure that you arrive early, and particularly in this area, if you are driving or using public transit, make sure you prepare plenty of time for traffic. 5 miles can be 5 minutes. It can also be 50 minutes. So make sure that you are keeping an eye on your time. Here, again, we're not going to do this since we will have questions, but you can do this activity on your own. What to bring to an interview: here are examples of professional bags as well as padfolios. So this black and cognac padfolio that you see here are good additions to have. Interview attire, ideally focusing more on the individuals on the left. And here we do have an in-depth guide on that you can click on at your own time. But we typically are going to dress more professional for an interview rather than more casual. Reneging on an offer. So if offered, do note that the university does have a renege policy. So please don't put yourself in a situation where you accept a position without intending to truly accept that offer and take that position. Remember that you do have the ability to ask for more time in consideration. And part of what my team does is we will actually work with you to make sure that if you need to extend and think about an offer, we're happy to help you in that process. However, once you have accepted an offer, you really should be moving forward with that offer and stopping all other interviews, letting employers know that you are no longer available and that you've accepted another offer. And following up, so making sure that you're sending thank you notes, typically for 24 hours after your interviewer. Keep it brief. If you need to reiterate your skill sets, reiterate your interest in the position. If you want to customize it because you remember some of the questions or responses that you asked on, you're able to do so. But if you also need to, maybe you fumbled one of the interview questions, you've thought about your response and you have a better example, your thank you note can also retouch on your actual interview. For questions, you are able to schedule appointments with our office. So here is our contact information, as well as what we do, as well as our website. And then we have a number of LinkedIn groups. Again, you'll have these slides to be able to join. So we have our mentoring group, which is our Costello Career Collective, as well as our international student networking group. So for any international students, networking becomes even more important for you given the limitations in terms of employment. So we have a private networking group specifically for you. Last, we have our Instagram and our overall LinkedIn page. On our Instagram page, our interns are posting information on tips, suggestions, various different tricks, fun career videos, as well as anytime we have employers on campus, you will see that there. On our LinkedIn page, we also post relevant career articles, positions that come across for alumni or from alumni, as well as a number of different kind of advice and examples for you.